For this opinion piece, we're going to be looking at a topic which I find fairly interesting and fairly present in most people's training, and that is towing the line between technical execution and getting stronger. What is the optimal approach? So, to begin the discussion, we're going to set up two straw men to kind of get in our heads what it is we're discussing. Straw man number one only trains with perfect technique, so we're going to use the back squat as an example because it's fairly easy. For his squats, they all have to be all the way down. He has to hold his form throughout, so he needs to have his bum out. His lower back needs to be arched. He needs to have his knees perfectly in line, no bowing. His back must be straight. He must be upright. Um, his bar path must be perfect. And any weight or any kind of rep range that challenges him, as in it kind of breaks down his form, he just won't do it. So if he's doing a 5x5 session and he goes up to a weight where he's not happy with his form, he'll drop the weight down to a weight where he's happy with the form. Strongman number two only is obsessive with the weight on the bar. He doesn't care. He'll squat to whatever depth. He's not taking a piss. He's not core squatting, but he'll maybe squat above parallel. He'll maybe squat with his knees in a little bit. He'll use his back, and he's worried about the weight and the reps. So he'll always strive for more weight or more reps on sets, and that's how he trains. Um, so what we're gonna kind of with these two straw men in mind, what we're gonna have a little discussion about is what kind of approach is optimal, and how can we best marry these two kinds of ways of thinking. So if you're worried about having good technique and you're straw man number one, a few examples of how you could train would be you could use a 5x5 system where it's progressive, but it's only progressive within loads that you can use what you consider to be good technique with. You can use something like a Russian Squat Masters, a Smolov, or a Shilko, some kind of percentage-based training program, and you only set maxes with lifts that are performed with what you would consider good technique, and that's how you progress. Um, if you're person number B, ways you may train to get stronger or would be suitable for your kind of ethos or your training ethos would be a program like 531. Any kind of rep out training, or setting like a hard progressive percentage based program. So maybe you set up like a Russian Squat Masters, or you set up a Shilko based off lifts that were completed with any old how form, and that's how you're going to achieve the percentages. That's how you're going to achieve your rep PBs. It's just A to B. Doesn't matter as long as you complete the lift. So both these kind of training ethoses have their own kind of pluses and negatives. So for the guy who's only worried about technical execution, he's going to be very efficient in his training. He's going to be able to squat more, deadlift more, bench more. He's going to be able to get more volume in, as all of his lifts are going to be very efficient. So they're going to take up less kind of recovery time for him. He's also much less likely to get injured. Since he's keeping his back in good angles, his knees are in good angles, his shoulders are protected. Um, the kind of negatives for him though is he's going to have to perform a lot of volume to kind of get into physiological stress. So for him, maybe if he's doing a 5x5 program, by the time he gets to the fifth set, maybe that's the only set that actually taxes him, that actually makes him have to push through it and like put in a kind of maximal voluntary effort. And at the end of the day, it's those kinds of maximal voluntary efforts that are going to get you stronger. They're the kind of things that stress the mechanical factors, stress the neurological factors. Just lifting with good form, with good lines, get you better at the skill, but eventually to get stronger, you're going to have to push yourself within those kinds of sets where you break down, where maybe you're not using a perfect line, but you're trying to fight to keep the perfect line. Those are the sets, or those are the efforts that actually result in you getting a neurological benefit, or you getting a mechanical benefit out of the sets. So that's kind of the pluses and negatives for good technical execution. The pluses and negatives for the guy who just wants to get stronger is he's gonna spend pretty much the majority of his training in those kind of training stresses that we were talking about. So he's gonna spend his time like pushing himself maximally. So his training is going to be more efficient in the sense that he's going to be week in, week out providing a training stress on his body that's going to result in him getting stronger. Um, That's probably the only really positive that kind of training has. The negative that kind of training has is he won't be as efficient because he'll just lift with any old technique, which isn't the best way of doing things, obviously. He's far more likely to get injured because he'll lift it any old way. So if he, for some reason, or she even, has some kind of like knee bow, they use their back too much in a squat, they round excessively in a deadlift, but they just keep stressing and stressing and stressing, they're far more likely to have a tissue breakdown or an overuse injury. They're also more likely to be tight. Um, but they have the benefit of being of applying a physiological stress day in day out or week in week out is a huge benefit for getting stronger. So now in our minds have kind of an idea of what these strongmen look like, how they might train, and the pluses and negatives of how they're training. We're going to talk about how best to toe the line for different goals. So for the first person, we're going to talk about a powerlifter. So for a powerlifter, you can kind of stratify your lifts into two kinds of lifts, or that's how I like to think about them. You can think of a squat as more of a skill-based lift. Um, so having a good line, using the correct positions through the lift makes a crap load of difference, especially for lighter lifters. Heavier lifters you can get away with more because you're fatter, or you've got more muscle mass, and you've got more kind of things to muscle through the lift. However, you're a lighter lifter, a female, technical execution is going to be far better for you in the long run, and for the bigger lifter too. Technical execution and squats a much better strategy. So for that sort of lift, I would kind of advocate more of a percentage based approach. With maybe at the end of, say you do like a 10-week block of Russian Squat Masters, you do a 10-week block of Shilko, you could have some kind of peaking at the end of it. So maybe you run a 5-3-1, or you run some kind of rep out training at the end of your skill based block to kind of take advantage of that newfound form or that newfound efficiency and really push yourself. You can run into a few negative aspects of that kind of training though, where you can injure yourself quite. You can either injure yourself or hurt yourself if you're not careful with it, because you will be far stronger at the end of that 10-week period than when you started, and you'll be able to push yourself far harder. So it's something to be aware of. Maybe if you're going to adapt that approach for lifts like bench press and deadlift, they're what I would refer to more as muscular lifts. So for that kind of training, applying a weekly stress or applying like a weekly overload, as far as like you maybe use like a linear program where the 12 rep, you do a 12 rep week, a 10 rep week, an 8 rep week, etc. And every one of those weeks applies like a maximal effort. So by the time you get on to the first, second, or third set of the tens or the eights or whatever you're doing, you're having to really cut through those reps to get them out. That, in my experience, is kind of the best way of training those lifts. Rep out training works out fairly well with it as well. So 5-3-1 is a pretty good program for pressing and deadlifting. Maybe not such a good program for squat. It doesn't mean it's not people haven't got stronger using it, because obviously they have. It's just my experience. You might be better off using more of a percentage-based approach for something like a squat. Weightlifting, completely different animal. Their lifts are very highly skill based, or they have high skill percentages based off them. But at the end of the day, the skill is at the top end, and that's what you're worried about. So maybe if you're a beginner, you're only worried about perfect execution all the time, or just getting enough volume in, so that your execution is much better by the end of the phase. But by the time you become an intermediate or advanced weightlifter, there needs to be some kind of max out training in your Olympic lifting. So if you need a max squats, you need a max clean and jerk at least once a week, or at least that's kind of the successful strategies that are prevalent in the top end. So like Olympic level athletes, that's how they train. Um, Top level American athletes, and that's how they train. And the athletes that I see in the gym day in day out, the weightlifters, that's how they get the best results. So that's how they've gotten the best results, was lifting to that kind of limit. Because at the end of the day, the competition is a limit competition, so you need to be better at that end. That makes sense for that. Strongman, very weird sport. Within your kind of accessory training, within your weights training, I think you'd be much better adopting a more technically proficient um, way of lifting. So like squats are technically proficient, presses are technically proficient, deadlifts are technically proficient, because the events training is going to take so much of a toll on your body. There's no pretty way to lift a stone. There's no pretty way to lift a log. There's no pretty way to lift an axle. It's hard on your body, and that's kind of the end of the day what you really want to be spending your time getting better at. Squats, deadlift, presses. These are just to give you more juice so you can use more weight in those events. To that end, training an event should just be absolutely just to get stronger at it. So just train at that intensity. However, gym lifting, in my opinion, should probably be more technical based. So you're spending less recovery on the gym lifts, which at the end of the day aren't that important, and you can spend more of your kind of recovery or more of your training intensity on the events in your sport, which are more important. An example of crossover might be a deadlift event, might be a squat event, but you'd be far better practicing it. So if there is no squat, there is no deadlift in the comp coming up, you train that lift in a way that's not really gonna you can get better at it, but you're not gonna eat into your recovery. However, if there's like a squat event or there's a deadlift event, then that becomes event training. Therefore, you just train at the peak at it, so you just go balls out to get better at it, and that's how you train it. For sport, you should really lean very heavily in the technical proficiency, because like the strongman, the weightlifting isn't your sport, or the weight training isn't your sport. It's a cross training to get better at your sport. So for things like squats, especially for a deadlift, you should really be concentrating on technical proficiency within the lift. It's much more important for you. You should have some kind of element, some kind of I just want to get stronger element in your training, because it's going to help in the long run. But that should be used sparingly. So maybe within a 6-week block, or a 5-week block, or a 4-week block, or however you organize your training, you may have some kind of rep out element to your training, or you have some kind of maximal element to your training. But you should definitely spend the majority of your time just getting stronger with good technique, because that will take up less of your recovery and means you've got more to spend in your sports training, which at the end of the day is what you're training for. For the general gym buddy who maybe isn't a competitive athlete, or for a bodybuilder, you should, for bodybuilding, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. You can squat high, you can deadlift with whatever form you want, as long as you can train it to an intensity week in, week out, not get injured, get better at it. You're going to achieve what you want to achieve, which is to get bigger, and basically to get bigger. So for bodybuilding, it doesn't really matter how you train, because the weight on the bar is irrelevant. It's the size of the muscles moving the weight on the bar that matters for you. So as long as you can get bigger, you can use machines, you can do whatever the hell you want. As long as you're getting bigger and you're achieving your goals, it's fine. Just not getting injured might be where you might want to pay attention to your technique. So in a deadlift, maybe you don't want to lift it any old way, because you might hurt yourself. For the general gym buddy who's just lifting for the enjoyment of lifting, if you're a beginner, technical proficiency is by far more important for you, because you need to learn how to lift properly at the end of the day, and that's what's important for you. But once you become more advanced, then maybe you need to pay more attention to things like rep out training. Anyway, that's going to conclude our discussion today. We're running on a little bit. Any questions or comments, feel free to discuss them in the comments section. Always happy to engage with conversation. Okay, goodbye.